Hey, this is Bradley Chubb, and you're listening to The Snap.
Hey, this is Cortland Sutton.
Hey, this is Tim Patrick.
And you're listening to The Snap
with Sidney Jones
on Broncos
Podcast Network. Yeah.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for this week's edition of The Snap. As always, I'm your host, Sidney Jones. It's been a whirlwind of a week here at the UC Health Training Center. General Manager George Paton officially named Nathaniel Hackett the head coach of the Denver Broncos. Hackett then flew out here with his family, did his introductory press conference, and started his first week of work as the 18th coach in Broncos history. So joining me today on this episode of The Snap to discuss the hiring is Washington Post reporter Nicki Jhabvala, who has previously been with The Athletic and the Denver Post. Nicki, so excited to chat with you today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for many of my listeners who might not know, Nicki wrote this fantastic in-depth feature story on Nathaniel Hackett back in October as the Washington football team was set to face the Packers in the regular season. She discussed his coaching journey, the influence of his father, Paul Hackett, and talked to some of those who were closest to him. So for any of my listeners who haven't seen it, haven't read it, make sure to go check it out on WashingtonPost.com. A great read. So Nicki, you knowing his coaching career, his history, first and foremost, I want to ask you, what was your initial reaction when you found out the Broncos were hiring Nathaniel Hackett?
I was like, oh my God, I got to move back to Denver now. No, I think it's a fantastic hire. I really do believe that. I hope they win so he can stick around a good bit, because I really enjoyed getting to know him for that story. And I think there's just something different about him. And I think anybody kind of realizes that within, 2 seconds of meeting him, so I hope he sticks around, because he's really fun. That's for sure.
Yeah. Kind of what excites you about this hire for the Broncos in terms of, everything that Nathaniel Hackett did in Green Bay for their offense?
Yeah, I think people kind of overlook his experience. In Green Bay, he was the offensive coordinator, but not the play caller, but that he has plenty of play calling experience, from the college ranks on up through Buffalo, his time in Jacksonville. I mean, he led that team to a conference championship in 2017. So that's the first thing that really sticks out to me. I mean, he's brilliant. He was a neurobiology major. He was, one step away from becoming a doctor. And he's like, oh, I think I'll do football instead. But I think the biggest thing with him is his personality. He's just so relatable to everybody. He can get along with, the older quarterback in the room. He can relate to the 20 somethings that, they just drafted. He taught hip hop dancing in college. He's basically a wine connoisseur. He's kind of a Renaissance dude, but he's fun. He's got more energy than you could ever hope to have. And I think it's just really refreshing to be around him. And I think he's just what the Broncos need after, some really trying seasons there and figuring out the quarterback situation. So I think it's really just the complete package with him.
It's funny, Nicki, he's only been here for a couple of days now. And when he first got here, that first day of his introductory press conference, you can just feel the energy that he brings, and you can kind of feel a difference in the building here, only having been here just a couple of days.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he's very innovative too. That's the other thing I should say is, he's learned quite a bit, obviously, from his father and being around his teams growing up. And he's a football lifer. He just also has a lot of other interests, which I think is great. But he also incorporates a lot of new things. I mean, a lot of what they did in Green Bay, for instance, that was a blend of schemes. And during COVID, he's got a lot of friends in education. So he created this sort of interactive playbook that, it worked for everybody. He's got, the plays on it, and then he's got these little pop-ups where his face will pop up, and it's hilarious, but he makes it memorable. He makes learning the stuff fun. And for younger guys, even the older guys, it sticks with you because of that experience with him.
Absolutely. Nicki, why do you think maybe Denver was the right fit for him here? Or why do you think right now was the right time for him? This isn't the first coaching search cycle that we've seen him receive a lot of attention in.
Yeah, last year he got an interview with the Atlanta Falcons. I think a lot of it is getting that extra experience with an older quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in Aaron Rodgers. So now he's got the resume where he's known for developing younger guys. He can work well with the more seasoned vets who don't really need the coaching, and it's more of kind of a collaborative thing there. But I just think he's ready. You get to a point where, you've been around the game for so long, so much, you've done play calling. It's just the natural next step. And to come here to an organization that is still one of the marquee franchises in the NFL,
Right.
And has a ton of talent across the roster. They just need that one piece that unfortunately a lot of teams need this year.
Right.
But he's got kind of the right mindset, the right experience to really help them develop. They got a lot of young players, and if they can find help at that quarterback spot, they have a really good shot.
Well, there's already been multiple reports about potential offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator candidates. What are your thoughts on as he starts to build this coaching staff? Does anyone really jump out to you?
The one name I keep hearing a lot is Ejiro Evero, who's a secondary coach for the Rams. They go way back. I mean, they were roommates in college at UC Davis. They started out together as an assistant at UC Davis, started, on the Tampa Bay staff with John Gruden as quality control. So they've been around each other a lot. And Evero has been around some really great coaches coming up. He's worked with Wade Phillips. He has time with LaFleur, now McVay, and time with Fangio. So it's Staley. So it's, he's really got a ton of experience, and, the natural next step for him is probably defensive coordinator. So I know that's one name that's kind of stuck out. I know others have mentioned it too, but, Doug Marrone might be another one for offensive coordinator. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to get interesting here soon, but I think they have a lot of good options for sure.
Like you mentioned earlier, Nicki, Nathaniel, he's learned a lot from his dad throughout his coaching career, and he's talked about it so many times. I know you mentioned in your article, Paul Hackett, echoing that change is a norm and you have to evolve. So what changes do you see Nathaniel making to this Denver team?
I think a lot of it you'll notice immediately just in the way he conducts practices, the way he holds meetings, the way he is with media. I mean, heard music will be back. I would expect nothing less with him. I think it's going to be a more open atmosphere. I know there are always sort of limits on how open it can be in terms of, with media and everything. But I think especially at first, because there's that newness to it. You expect more energy, more up-tempo feel. But a lot of what we'll see is kind of predicated on their success, and that's predicated on whether they can get a quarterback. It's the case for pretty much every team. But I think he has the mindset, certainly, that certainly that energy. Oh my gosh, if I had a fraction of that, I'd feel great.
Right.
But I think the desire is definitely there to make it as good as possible. So it's going to be a fun off season, just kind of watching him kind of build his staff and seeing who he targets over these next few events with the All-Star games, and Senior Bowl's going on now, so kind of looking at who he's evaluating too. So it'll be interesting.
Well, Nicki, as you're gaining this background information on, Hackett's career, interviewing those who know him best, what was one of the most interesting facts you found out about Hackett? Kind of what stood out to you?
There were a lot of them.
Yeah.
I mean, the most fun one is that he taught hip hop dancing classes. It's not something you would expect,
No.
From any coach really. But he did say, if I really wanted to be a backup dancer for Janet Jackson. He really does truly love Justin Timberlake. Some of the best stories were from Blake Bortles, as he's talking about, how they have, team meetings each week just to kind of go over playbook and what plays you're going to install that week. And a lot of them just had the most bizarre names, and a lot of them were named after Justin Timberlake songs or Star Wars. And I remember Blake saying, like, it got to a point sometimes where we had to be like, no, I'm not calling that in the huddle. I'm not going to say that out loud. I mean, if the mics pick that up, there's no way I'm saying that. But one of his favorite plays was Dirty Pop, which I hope makes a strong comeback. Or, if I hear one of the, quarterbacks saying, just scream out and bringing sexy back, that would be freaking hysterical to me.
Okay.
But I fully expect it to happen with Hackett. So,
well, that's something I'm going to look forward to then.
The play calls are just going to be great.
They're going to be fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
I love it. Well, Nicki, one thing that really stood out in your article to me is you said that, Hackett, he has a lifetime of football knowledge, the presence of a performer, and the relatability of a best friend. How do you think that makes him arguably one of the most unique coaches in the NFL right now?
Yeah, I think it does make him one of the most unique ones. And I was honestly surprised he wasn't really heavily sought after before now. I mean, he had an interview, like I said, with Atlanta last year, but he wasn't one of the top ones. And, after meeting him, like, why isn't your phone blowing up? I don't understand. And I think sadly, a lot of it is just the way the NFL operates. They kind of want that old school mentality, that regimented mentality. And sometimes that doesn't always align with, what the players need, what they want, what kind of motivates them, what helps them develop. And I think Nathaniel Hackett has that right balance. I mean, he's fun. He knows when to turn it off too. He knows how to be serious. I don't think he would have made it this far, and certainly made it that far in like neurobiology if he didn't. But
right.
So yeah, I think he has that right balance, and he is different. But I also think that's, in my opinion, I think that's what sports needs more of.
Right.
There needs to be more personality. I think, even nowadays, players seem comfortable speaking out about causes that are important to them. They're not just athletes or football players. And I think he's a coach that really embodies that. And I think that's good for players. I think they will really appreciate that.
Well, appreciate your insight and knowledge on Nathaniel Hackett, Nicki. Before you go, as many of my listeners know here on The Snap, one of my main goals is to highlight women's impact in and around the NFL. And with today being National Girls and Women in Sports Day, would love to take a couple minutes to highlight your career. So to start, Nicki, can you detail what your current role with the Washington Post entails?
Yeah, so I'm the beat reporter for the Washington football team, or whatever they're going to be named as of Wednesday. So, I mean, it's much like when I was covering the Broncos, wherever this team goes, I go. And then, in between, kind of in the off season, I try to help out as much as I can on, the national NFL beat. So I do everything NFL. I love it. I love being around players and coaches and learning from them and hearing their stories. And it's a fun gig. It can be a stressful gig, as I'm sure you know too. But it is, and it's a grind. But it's one where, I'm very grateful I get to do it,
Well, as I mentioned earlier, you were previously with The Athletic, the Denver Post. Can you kind of walk me through the path that you took to get to where you are today?
Yeah, I went to UNC, North Carolina, not Northern Colorado. Remember, I always had to clarify that out there. Yeah, I went to North Carolina. Thought I was going to become a doctor. Did not. Became a journalist instead. And then right out of school, I moved to New York. I got an internship with Sports Illustrated for Kids, actually. And kind of near the end of my internship, a full-time position opened up with SI.com. So I spent 5 years there, was an online editor, producer, worked mostly with our NBA writers, which was awesome because I love the NBA too. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I spent 6 months at Sports on Earth, which was awesome. A lot of great writers there. And then I went to the New York Times. I was homepage producer, copy editor, mostly worked overnight from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which was always interesting. Yeah. I was mostly on hard news too, so you learn a ton. That was one of the greatest experiences, even with the hours. And then I moved to Denver. My parents moved out to Denver. I love it out there. It's still home. All my family is out there. Started working with the Denver Post, got on the Broncos beat, loved every minute of it. Then went to the Athletics, stayed on the Broncos beat. And after a couple of years there, I moved out here. I think it was in July 2020. So been out here for a couple of years, just covering the Washington team.
What were maybe some of your biggest challenges that you faced in the industry, and how did you overcome those?
I'd say the biggest ones is just kind of starting out, since I was more on the editing side for 7 years, and then joining the Broncos beat. I was kind of the new kid, and there are a lot of really good experienced reporters and journalists in that media. It's a competitive group, the Broncos media.
Yes.
People underestimate the Denver market. Let me tell you, it is competitive. God bless Mike Kliss and Jeff Legwold and Troy Rank. But they taught me a ton, seriously. But those first couple of years, whenever you change a beat is tough, because you're really working to kind of build up your network and your sourcing, and get agents to answer your phone, and hey, I'm here. So that was tough. But then you start to find your place. I'd say the toughest ones too are, you have to cover every aspect of a beat. And sometimes it's, not always great news. And that's always a tough balance. But you learn a lot, you're challenged a lot. It's the beauty of covering sports, in my mind, is you get to cover a little bit of everything. It's never just NFL. Honestly, like covering the X's and O's is the smallest part of my job, especially out here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love being challenged every day. It's fun.
Well, kind of going off of that, last one for you here. What advice would you give women in the industry, or someone looking to get into the industry, no matter what area of it they want to work in?
I think the best thing I learned was just get as much experience as you can. I think journalism is different from some other industries. Like if you're going into finance or business or something, it's maybe less about your credentials or where you went to school, or
right.
It's more about your experience. Like it was still different then when I came out, but it was more about, show me the clips you have, show me your writing experience. What topics have you covered? I want to see that you can do this job. And a lot of it is learned on the job. So I never turned down a story. It's also why I have no life, but it got me here. So I guess it was worth it in the long run. Yeah. So I just get as much experience as you can, whether that's, writing, video, radio, whatever it is, it will all help in the long run. And the other thing is, it's just kind of be there, be available, as you're starting out with the new team, especially,
right.
Any charitable events, be there. FaceTime matters. So, as Mark Schlereth always said, you can't make the club in the tub, so be available.
So true. I love it. Great advice, Nicki. Thank you so much for joining me today, and really appreciate all your insight.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of The Snap. Thanks so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in. And thanks again to Nicki Jhabvala for joining me. Make sure to stay up to date on The Snap by following the Broncos Podcast Network on Twitter and checking out the Broncos YouTube page. I'll see you all next time.